The storm had erased the world. Snow moved sideways in the dark, each gust carrying knives of ice that sliced through wool and skin alike. Beneath a half-buried ridge of rock, a soldier pressed himself against the earth, his rifle frozen to his gloves. His breath came in clouds that vanished before they reached his eyes. Around him, nothing moved, no horizon, no sound but the endless, grinding wind. The convoy had vanished. 3 days ago. Rations were gone. Matches damp, body heat draining, minute by minute into the white. Yet, somewhere under that suffocating sky, he refused to yield. Faint orange memory flickered behind his eyes, the glow of a fire once shared among men. That, he thought, was the only warmth that mattered now. Wind screamed louder. He closed his eyes against it, feeling the numbness creep through his jaw. Death in the Arctic wasn't violence. It was surrender. But he wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. And then, buried in that storm, he remembered something he'd seen in old Trapper Do, something older than the rifles they carried. The wind finally stopped for a breath. He began to dig. Cold is not merely temperature. It is a thief that works in silence. It steals movement first, then thought, then time. His gloves stiffened, his fingers wooden, but his memory burned steady. The Arctic, he realized, didn't kill through force. It killed by convincing you to stop trying. His trench knife scraped against the frozen ground. Beneath the crust, he found what he hoped for: moss, dry veins of tundra grass, brittle but real. A battlefield manual could never have told him this. Nature was both enemy and teacher, because modern soldier carried fuel tablets and flint. Yet they failed here, too brittle, too cold to spark. The forgotten method required something simpler: the earth itself. Beneath the snow lay insulation, not death. The ground still held warmth, captured from the last brief touch of sunlight. He scooped the moss into his coat, breaking it apart, shaping it with shaking hands. The trick, he remembered, was not to fight the cold, but to use it, to carve a hollow, to trap breath and heat, to let the body become its own hearth. In the Arctic, fire didn't begin with flame. It began with the refusal to believe the cold was all there was. It was 1942, the Arctic convoys, merchant ships, threading the ice routes from Britain to Murmansk, were lifelines of war. Men froze standing watch. Steel cracked under frost like shattered glass. The soldier, Private Thomas Havelock, 21, had been part of a supply escort that never arrived. A Luftwaffe attack scattered them across the tundra. Those who survived, the crash had faced the oldest adversary of all, cold, indifferent to courage. Radios failed. Compasses spun. Yet in that emptiness, Havelock's mind returned to a night before deployment, when a Norwegian guide had demonstrated ground fire, a way to create warmth from decay, not flame. It had seemed absurd then, almost mystical. Now it was the only thing left between life and silence. He began stacking the moss, wrapping it in his parka lining, forming a nest inside the snow cave he'd carved. The breath inside condensed, dampened, froze, and yet, within an hour, the temperature inside, the hollow rose enough that his shaking slowed. Outside, the snowstorm built walls for him. He wasn't fighting the Arctic anymore. He was using it. Above him, the wind carried no voices, only the creak of ice, like distant memory reminding him. Survival is not conquest. It is adaptation. Night and day blurred into one dim twilight. Hunger gnawed. The cold was constant, a heartbeat that never stopped. His mind slipped between memories. The kitchen warmth of home, the smell of coal, his mother's hands cracking ice for the stove. Every image was a form of heat. Havelock's face was raw from frost. His boots had frozen solid, toes blackened. He tore strips from his undershirt to wrap them, soaked them in melted snow, and pressed them against his chest. The warmth of blood would dry them. Primitive insulation. He whispered to himself not to sleep. Sleep was the whispering death. He remembered reading once that even at 30 WWII, a human body emits about 100 watts of heat, enough to sustain life if trapped properly. He turned that thought into a mission, each breath condensed into tiny beads of frost that clung to the roof of the snow cave, forming a shimmering crust. In the faint light, they looked like stars, cold constellations forming above a soldier's will. The fire motif returned in thought only, not flame, but endurance. Each beat of his heart was a spark refusing to die. And that night, for the first time in days, he slept without freezing. When he awoke, the air was warm enough to breathe without pain. The snow cave had sealed itself in layers of ice, reflecting his shallow breaths like mirrors. He realized then the trapper's secret wasn't myth. The old man had understood thermodynamics long before soldiers did. Ground fire wasn't flame. It was captured heat. By burrowing and insulating, the human body became its own furnace. Moss and air pockets worked as ancient engineering, slowing loss, redirecting warmth inward. Modern gear promised efficiency. Ancient wisdom promised survival. The distinction was life or death. Havelock tested his body, flexing fingers, counting digits still pink. His hands still moved. That was proof. Outside, the wind hissed, but no longer as an enemy. He listened, half smiling. The Arctic had given him silence as a weapon. Where technology had failed, simplicity endured. He packed his meager belongings, wrapped the moss into a tight bundle, and began the long crawl toward the faint shadow of trees miles away. Behind him, his shelter remained, a hollow, in the snow glowing faintly with the warmth he left behind. It wasn't much, but in the endless white it looked almost like light. 2 days later, search patrols found him staggering near the ridge, half delirious, coated in frost but alive. The medics dismissed his survival as luck until they saw the moss bundle. He showed them how it worked, the layered cavity beneath the snow, the breathing vent above. Soon the method spread through the convoy units. Soldiers called it the ground nest. It saved men in Norway, Finland, and even in the Siberian campaigns. It required no matches, no stoves, no modern gear. Only patience, precision, and faith in physics older than books. In field notes recovered after the war, his commanding officer recorded it as Havelock's fire. But Havelock himself never called it that. He said it wasn't a fire, it was an idea. Even decades later, mountaineers and Arctic explorers rediscovered the same principle: microclimate insulation. In sub-zero survival, the smartest thing isn't to burn fuel, it's to waste none. The moss, the snow, the breath all became collaborators in survival, where modern gear failed in complexity. Simplicity succeeded, and when the next storm came, other men buried themselves in snow, trusting that the earth itself, if respected, could still be warm. Word of the method spread through military manuals, unofficial but whispered. The Finns refined it. The Soviets renamed it the living cell. The Americans, decades later, would adapt the concept into thermal bivouacs. Yet, as technology advanced, synthetic fibers, chemical heaters, satellite blankets, the principle faded. Survival became a product, not a practice. Few remembered that a man once lived 3 days in a snow cave with nothing but moss, patience, and instinct. Historians found his field notes in 1972. The handwriting trembled but remained legible. You don't light fire. You keep it from going out. Modern preppers speak of redundancy, gear loadouts, and tactical flame sources. But Havelock's story revealed something deeper. The best survival hack was learning to see warmth, not as an external tool, but as something already within. By the time he died, long after the war, his hands still bore faint scars from frostbite. Yet he kept a jar of Arctic moss on his mantelpiece, a reminder that what saved him wasn't invention. It was rediscovery. In a world obsessed with progress, his legacy whispered the quiet truth. Sometimes forward is backward, and wisdom is remembering what we forgot, biologists later confirmed. What trappers and soldiers already knew. Human survival depends not on fire but on heat management. Snow, paradoxically, insulates. Air trapped between moss fibers prevents convection. The body becomes the source, and nature the shelter. The lesson was elemental physics. Heat. Flow seeks balance. Instead of fighting cold with flame, you trap heat with patience. Psychologists studied survivors of extreme cold and found a pattern. Those who lived didn't panic. They slowed down, accepted, adapted. Acceptance, not defiance, preserved life. Modern gear often amplifies dependence. Batteries die. Fuel freezes, plastics crack, but the mind that understands environment becomes infinite in resource. Havelock's ground fire became more than technique. It was philosophy. The same law applies to emotion, leadership, endurance. Conserve your inner heat when the world turns cold. In the quiet after the storm, warmth feels different. It's no longer temperature, it's presence. Science explains the how, but only history explains the why. Survival is not about beating the elements. It's about learning their rhythm until you become part of them. 80 years later, the Arctic looks the same. White horizons, blue shadows, wind that speaks no language. But the men who cross it now carry thermal tents and composite stoves. Unaware they're echoing the same fight. Modern preppers boast of gear tested for polar expeditions. Yet many still freeze, because they don't understand the principle that saved a forgotten soldier. Warmth begins with knowledge, not equipment. Every wilderness guide today teaches insulate from below. Every survival course stresses build microclimates. Few know that those lessons came from nameless men who refused to die in snow. Somewhere in a military archive, the pages of Havelock's notes still rustle when air moves. Between them is a pressed strip of moss, brown, delicate, ancient, the symbol of a truth we keep rediscovering. Progress is circular. Every advancement eventually leads us back to humility. And when storms cut power and silence the modern world, people will again huddle close to the ground, learning what he learned, that the earth itself still remembers how to keep us alive. The snow has long melted above his resting place. The Arctic wind still sings over empty ridges, carrying no names, only echoes. But if you listen closely, the silence is not empty. It hums faintly, like breath against frost. That's the sound of endurance, the same warmth that once pulsed inside a snow cave, under siege from the coldest war. What Private Havelock proved wasn't just survival. He proved that knowledge older than fear outlasts every invention. The true fire doesn't burn, it remembers. Every generation rediscovers it differently, through solar panels, through campfires, through faith in the simplest things. Yet its essence never changes. The will to endure, to adapt, to turn the unlivable into life. If you ever find yourself in a storm, remember this. Light doesn't only come from flame. Sometimes it's the quiet persistence of heat beneath your own skin. They never lit a fire, but somehow they became it.